this evening. This brings us to special orders of business, beginning with SP1. Would someone like to make a motion regarding item SP1?
I move item SP1. I move item SP1, adoption of resolution 8R22, amending the rules of the City Council to require council members to be vaccinated against COVID-19 or otherwise test negative in advance of City Council meetings.
Second.
Councilmember Reed moves item SP1. Councilmember Burns seconds. Opening discussion, and just want to remind folks that the clerk asked for an amendment to be considered, and so if someone wants to make such a motion, I would entertain that as well.
Yes.
I ask folks to use the raise your hand function in Zoom because that's the only way that guarantees I see people in an equitable way. I think let's go. I think Councilmember Reed has his hand up first. So we'll go with Reed followed by Nusma.
Yeah. So I am in favor of this resolution. I think it's important for City Council members to follow the same rules that our staff and the rules that we want to set for other folks. So I think this makes sense. I agree that the clerk should be included in this as well. And so I will move that amendment, as well as I think another group that was left out are the folks who serve on our committees. I think the same requirement should be in place for the council members, the clerk, and folks who serve on our boards, committees, and commissions. And so I want to make an amendment to include the clerk and board, committee, and commission members.
So I was all set to relax my amendments in writing because for the clerk, because it's so clear. But actually to amend this to include other BCCs would be a little bit more complicated because obviously the text of the resolution itself refers to city council meetings as opposed to board meetings. So it becomes a little more complicated. We can do that, but I just want to make sure we get that right rather than pass something we're not totally sure about.
Okay, yeah, we can, I'll put that in writing and make it say public meetings. 10 public meetings as opposed to city council meetings. Because I think this should count for, council members attend. We have various subcommittees and committees that we serve on. We should be testing in advance of that. And the folks that we serve with as well should be testing or fully vaccinated, or a mix of both is what I think is probably best. I do have a question. I do wonder, particularly including everyone, if we should include accessibility to testing for both city staff, to test for both city staff, our volunteers on committees and council members, for whoever wants, whether you're, regardless of your vaccination status, if you want to make sure you're keeping folks safe before coming to council, I think we should make those available.
So before we go to Councilmember Newsom, it looks like both Corporation Counsel Cummings and Interim City Manager Kandersky have responses to that, perhaps both parts of that. So I think, go ahead, and in whatever order you guys want to go.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Clerk Mendoza, Nicholas Cummings, Corporation Counsel. I just had, I'll take the second part of Councilmember Reed's comment about testing. I know that the Director of Health and Human Services is working on an agreement to get that done and available for folks in the community. So I'm going to believe that will probably be available to city staff as well as members of City Council for testing. And I actually reviewed that agreement prior to this meeting, so I know that is in the works. But with respect to the amendment, I would ask that the requirement for BCCs is well taken, but it could be placed in a different section. Because the City Council rules, we placed it here because it deals with members of City Council, but there are other rules that may deal with members of BCCs. So if we can maybe take that portion and put it someplace else, but insert the clerk into this particular resolution, that would make it a little bit easier on us, and we can put it someplace else for the boards, commissions, and committees. Thank you.
And so just want to make sure I understand your request. Are you requesting that we hold off on the BCC part to give you and Councilmember Reed time to work out the text properly, and then we can bring it back to the next meeting?
Yes.
Councilmember Reed, is that something you're comfortable with?
I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's very clear what the requirement is, and
I certainly agree. I just think it goes in a different section of the rules.
Yeah, I think we'll just we can identify that section very quickly. I don't think it'll go into another meeting. We just identify the section, and the language is this is not complicated. So I think we can move on this and keep our community and folks safe.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with that. I think if we're going to take action on it, we can do that tonight, and then update whatever part of the code we need to afterwards.
All right. Well, so let's move on then. I'll let maybe Councilmember Reed and Nick can communicate via email or text and try to get this hammered out. There's a couple of folks in line anyhow, so let's continue the discussion and see if this amendment can take shape while that goes on. So next will be Nusma, followed by Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to second the motion to add the clerk to the resolution in front of us. I guess we'll hold off and we'll see what to do about the BCCs. So I'm not sure if that's a real second or not while we're sorting everything out.
There's nothing to second quite yet, but we'll come back to you when the moment arises. Councilmember Braithwaite.
I guess this is more a question for our staff, and I'm curious to know how you are monitoring this just operationally across the board. Since I've been, I think January, the first or second week of January, we're stopped. I have to show my, proof of vaccination when I come into all the buildings. So I'm glad that there's an overall acceptance on City Council. We should be able to move through this very quickly. And to Councilmember Reed, I mean, everyone's stopped anyway coming into the building, and we're not meeting, in person. It's all remote. So I think we do have time to work through whatever details our corporation counsel is suggesting. But Kelly or anyone, can you just give some overall feedback how the process is working citywide, and are we seeing compliance? Those that are not vaccinated, are they staying home or actually standing someplace and taking a test? I guess is my curious question.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that, and I'll let Ike chime in for anything that I've missed. But again, good evening, Mayor Biss, Clerk Mendoza, members of City Council, Kelly Gandersky. It's Gandersky, interim city manager. I want to let you know that the process is working quite well. Ike Ogbo, our director of public health, has information from the IDPH. So when you are vaccinated against COVID-19, that information goes to IDPH. And because we are a health department, Ike has access to that list. So he is able to look up staff members who have received the vaccine for compliance. And we've provided an exception for those that do not want to have the vaccine. They must submit to weekly PCR testing. They are uploading their results to a form that goes directly to Health and Human Services, so it is HIPAA protected. And then Ike is able to verify their testing and test results through that portal. First, we have had very good compliance. There have been some staff members who have not complied, and disciplinary action ensues because our policy has been in effect since November 15th. But we have seen probably 99% of our staff comply. So it's not been a reoccurrence where we have people failing to test or failing or not getting the vaccine. So it is working quite well. And Ike, if you're on, if you want to add anything else that I may have missed.
I'm not sure if I see Ike in the Zoom, although.
Yeah, I don't think I see him either.
Okay. Councilmember Braithwaite, did you have follow-ups on that?
No, that answered my question.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, this is more for clarity. I get clarity overall, but certainly if we expand this to include members of our BCCs, boards, committees, and commissions. So this is 24 hours taken within 24 hours of each in-person city council, or if we approve one of Councilmember Reed's amendments or 24 hours before an in-person committee meeting, or, does this still apply if the meeting is held remotely?
So the goal of the rule, this particular body has met in person for the most part. And I think I actually mentioned this in the memo for the special order. The boards, commissions, and committees, which has a diversity of people that are involved in them, including a lot of those who are elderly, did not feel comfortable originally going back in person prior, even before we even began discussing this rule. And so we had to seek a consultation from the Illinois Municipal League on how to handle allowing them to be able to meet virtually while City Council was still meeting in person. And that's where it came about that the mayor could issue a declaration of impracticability for the boards, commissions, and committees, which is why now most of them meet virtually. The spirit behind implementing this rule is so that we all can meet in person like we had been prior to Omicron variant spikes. And I think that would probably be the same spirit with respect to the boards, commissions, and committees, is to get them to be back in person. I can just tell you from my experience last year, that was not a popular option amongst some of our boards, commissions, and committees, which is why they continue to meet virtually now. And I do know that it's being lobbied in Springfield on behalf of municipalities across the state to allow us this flexibility generally, because it's actually, it seems to be more accessible even to the public to be able to participate in meetings and not necessarily have to come to the Civic Center on a day like today when the wind chill might be, very frigid or something like that. So that's the spirit behind it.
To be clear, but if we decide to meet virtually or remotely, and if a committee decides to meet remotely, will members who are unvaccinated still need to provide proof that they have been tested 24 hours before a remote meeting?
I think that's ultimately a policy decision by you guys, but that is not the spirit or intent behind implementing the rule.
So
I think we should be clear, whatever it is, we should just be clear.
If I could just jump in. So like for city staff, we may have remote meetings, but we still have the policy in place because there are times that we meet all together in person. So just because we have the remote option, we still want and I'm speaking on behalf of staff, we want the policy in place because there's going to come a time, and hopefully this is the last we'll see of this tremendous spike. There's going to come a time where we're all going to have to be in person, and that's the ideal, is we want to be in person because it's very effective communication that way.
But let me just clarify this a little bit. The resolution that's in front of us is basically, it doesn't, the city staff, they work for us all the time, so the rule for the city staff is test negative weekly. But the resolution for the city council is test negative right before council meetings. And presumably the BCC amendment would be test negative right before the board, committee, or commission meets. And I think Councilmember Burns' point is to have a testing mandate that's tied to a remote meeting is kind of absurd. And so I think we would want to say either get vaccinated or else within 24 hours of an in-person meeting, have a negative test.
Yes.
So is that right, Councilmember?
Yeah, and I'm willing to make that motion to make to change it if that's what we're trying to get at. I guess I just want to make sure we're being clear here.
Yeah, I wonder. Sorry, man.
No, I was just going to repeat myself. Go ahead. Let me make sure, Councilmember, you've already spoken. Is there anybody else who's not spoken yet who wants to jump in at this time? I'm not seeing any new hands, so we'll go back to Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. I wonder, given that, I think, Councilmember Burns' amendment makes sense, given that I think there's agreement, right? If the goal of this is to keep everyone safe, that we would have this apply to our committee members and to our clerk. Our clerk also does not just attend, as a former clerk, does not only attend city council meetings. They, work within the building and interact with patrons of the city outside of that. And so I wonder if, when is our next meeting?
The next city council meeting is February 14th.
That's quite a ways away. I do wonder and I suppose that meeting is planned to be virtual at this point.
Well, there's no plan, but my hope would be to have it in person. And one of the things that I think would make it easier to make that decision would be passing something tonight that includes what was in the packet. So we would have a vaccine or test regime for council members in place by then.
Okay. Well, I have Council Cummings and I have agreed that Rule 5 is the place that the update for committee members would go. I think the slightly more complicated place is figuring out where the clerk would go, just permanently. I guess for the order of just for meetings, it makes sense to put the clerk with us, but I think we should have an overall policy for the clerk that mirrors what is going on with staff. And my last thing is, I wonder if we need to include right now, I spoke to Manager Gandersky about this earlier, and it seems that staff's vaccine and testing regime mandate expires with the collective bargaining agreement, which is in about a year. And I wonder if this is something in the rules. Do we want to set a rule, that 10 years from now, someone's going to look back and think, well, why is this a rule? So should we set an expiration or a revisit of this rule in a year as well?
Well, it only expires for those staff members that are members of the collective bargaining agreements. But for exempt city staff, the rule is in effect for perpetuity. We had to end it with the collective bargaining agreement deadline because that's how long we have contracts for. So we had to make it parallel with those already existing agreements. But for exempt city staff, it's in perpetuity. So I just want to make that distinction.
Thank you. I do wonder if we should just come back to this in a year or so at the same time as the collective bargaining agreements, just to, maybe at that point it's become the vaccines are, more effective and we've gotten things under control in a year, and it's more like the flu and we don't require a flu vaccine or testing regime to attend council meetings for committee members or council members for that matter. So I just wonder if we should revisit this in some period of time. So again, 10 years from now, there isn't some strange rule that people are looking back at.
So I have no problem with any of that. I agree that hopefully 10 years from now, the world is going to be such that we don't want this on the books. And I have no problem with building a sunset or revisit point in. I agree with your point that the city clerk is not just someone who shows up in the dais once every couple of weeks, and in many respects operates more like a staff member. There, I would also point out that we only have one city clerk, and she just disclosed to the public that she is fully vaccinated. So the sort of enforcement mechanism of the test part of the vaccinate or test regime is a little bit theoretical, as long as that individual remains our clerk. I wonder if we couldn't quickly agree to pass something that we're comfortable applies properly to the city council to enable us to have an in-person meeting on February 14th. And at that meeting, make any additional adjustments or changes or enhancements that we think might be further necessary.
Are we not holding any in-person committee meetings until then? Do we know that is the case?
Well, I'll turn that over to Mr. Cummings.
The only
committees are preferring not to meet in person anyways.
Yeah, the only committee meetings that have been held in person that I am aware of are the standing committees of City Council and I believe Reparations Committee. Unless that's changed for reparations because of the spike, but the last few Reparations Committee meetings have been in person at the Civic Center.
Councilmember Wen.
Mayor, I think these are all good points, but just as you described, in order to be expeditious about our next meeting, having the possibility that we can meet in person on February 14th, I think we should move forward as you described, and then if we want to discuss and prepare something for the boards and commissions or any of these other issues that we can't deal with in good order tonight, then we should do that. But I think in the interest of the city council being able to meet in person, we should do what's necessary for that tonight. And the other issues we should pick up at the next meeting.
Thank you. Is anyone else seeking to speak?
No, I just wanted to say I sent over the minor amendment that would just add in person to the resolution. And I think that applies to, yes, to committees, but also would add some clarity for city council members.
I will second that motion, if that is a motion.
It is a motion.
Councilmember Burns moves to amend 8-R-22 to clarify that it applies to in-person meetings. The text of that amendment is in the inbox of every city council member, as well as the corporation council and the interim city manager. Councilmember Reed seconds that motion. Is there any discussion on the amendment? And of course, folks might, I'm going to pause for about 20 seconds to give folks time to read it and make sure they understand it before we vote. Seeing no discussion, would the clerk please call the roll on Councilmember Burns' amendment to item SP1?
Councilmember Fleming, Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Braithwaite, Councilmember Braithwaite.
He's giving it
You're on
then.
mute.
I've been having mouse troubles. I said aye.
Okay, perfect. Councilmember Nguyen,
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton,
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion passes and item SP1 is adopted to clarify that it applies only to in-person meetings. Is there any further discussion on item SP1, which has now been amended?
Councilmember
Reed?
Well, I don't know if this is maybe the proper time, but I guess I would like to place a special order of business that would create similar regulations for all of our board, committee, and commission members on the next agenda, as well as I think it makes sense to provide. I heard from either Kelly or Nick just now that our health department is working on securing tests. I think that's a wonderful use of ARPA funds. I also wonder if we should have KN95 masks. I think, vaccines are great and effective for protecting us personally, but I wonder if KN95 masks are really good at protecting folks from other folks, making sure that we're keeping whatever sickness we have to ourselves. And so I wonder if that should be included here as well. And we should provide KN95 masks for these meetings, showing that the science is that the cloth masks are not effective.
Okay, well, I'm happy to, I don't think that motion is in order right now because there's a motion on the table, but I'm happy to, first of all, I'm happy to just do that. But if you prefer to do it by vote, I'm happy to also call on you as soon as we complete voting on item SP1.
Sure.
So is there any other discussion on item SP1? Seeing none, would the clerk please call the roll on item SP1, which again, recall was amended by Councilmember Burns to clarify that it applies, that the testing requirement applies specifically for in-person meetings.
I'm just going to start from Councilmember Kelly since Fleming is not on. Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Braithwaite,
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen,
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton,
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion passes. Councilmember Reed, did you want to make a motion regarding?
Yes. I move that we place a special order of business on the February 14th meeting agenda that would provide a testing and or vaccine requirement for our board, committee, and commission members, as well as a requirement that mirrors our staff requirement for our city clerk. And I would, I don't know if I'll put that, but I would love to see, some ARPA funds or just city funds used for both KN90 to make KN95 masks available to both committee members, council members, and the public who are attending in-person meetings, as well as potential test for committee members. But I'll certainly put in the KN95 mask. I think we should expend funds to provide KN95 masks for in-person meetings.
Second.
All right. Councilmember Reed moves to place an item on the February 14th agenda as a special order of business to establish a analogous mandate to what was just passed for members of boards, committees, and commissions, to establish a mandate for the city clerk that parallels the mandate for employees, and to provide KN95 masks for in-person public meetings, let's say. Councilmember Burns seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none,
I'm raising my hand. I mean, unless I'm missing something, this is almost a bit performative. I think we're all clear on the direction we need to go. I don't think I need to have another round of discussion. Why don't we just direct our staff to harmonize it across the board, and when it's ready, we can vote. But to vote to buy masks, I'm just trying to be protective of our time. So I'm a no, not because I disagree, just that this is a simple measure that we can push to our staff. That doesn't mean taking additional meeting time to state the obvious.
So the way I understand it, this is just a motion to make sure we can discuss not only the masks, which was only one.
I'm going to interject. I think let's just want to make sure everyone speaks when called on. Otherwise, we're going to have a mess. All
right. Well, not raise my. Somebody else is trying to raise. I always check that before I do that. No, I was just going to say that. Again, that was only the masks is only a part of the motion. I think it makes it clear that we want to discuss all 3 items at our next meeting, as opposed to keeping it open, because it's so straightforward. To your point, Councilmember Braithwaite, if we're not going to do it today, which I think was the consensus here, certainly among people who spoke, let's address it at our next meeting. So I think that's what this motion does.
Seeing no further discussion, would the clerk please call the roll on the motion to create the special order of business on the February 14th agenda?
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Braithwaite.
I'm a no, and I'm only explaining in the event that someone watches this later that we don't need to vote on something that's more of an operational function that can be managed by staff. So that's why I'm a no.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Suffredin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
7 voting in favor and 1 voting against, the motion passes, and this item will be a special order of business on the February 14th City Council agenda.